Good afternoon. My name is Patricia. I'm the chief agronomist of ICL in Israel. I will present a lecture on polysulphate, which is a new organic multi-nutrient fertilizer for fruit nutrition. Where does the polysulphate come from? Polysulphate is a crushed polyhalite. It is a natural mineral found over 1,000 meters below the North Sea of the North Yorkshire coast in the UK. The polyhalite is a mineral that was formed during the evaporation of prehistoric seas 260 million years ago. And the polyhalite is mined, is crushed, is screened, and loaded and shipped worldwide. Is it used as it is? It's a natural mineral. And you can see in the picture how it is mined from below sea level. And you can see the upper part of the plant where the polysulphate is crushed and the North Sea in the background. The polysulphate has 4 nutrients. First of all, the sulfur, 48% of SO3 as sulfate. The sulfur is an essential nutrient which constitutes all the proteins. Potassium has 14% of K2O as potassium sulfate. Potassium is the quality element in plant and it secures yield and quality of the crops. Magnesium, 6% of MgO. Magnesium is the central atom of the chlorophyll molecule, so it is very important for good photosynthesis. And finally, the 4th element is calcium, 17% calcium oxide as calcium sulfate. And the calcium produces strong and healthy crops. The polysulphate is a natural mineral. It's not a mixture of salts. You can do the same composition by mixing the salts, potassium sulfate, calcium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, but this is, has all the nutrients in the same crystal. You can see here the formula that is potassium, calcium, magnesium sulfate with 2 molecules of water. And you can see the structure in the figure. The characteristics of the polysulphate. It provides 4 nutrients in one application: sulfur, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. It is a single complex crystal and not a mixture of salts. It is a pure natural mineral without any added chemicals. It has very low chloride content, which is ideal for chloride-sensitive crops. It suits to all crops and all soil types. It's very versatile. It doesn't have any kind of restrictions. It has a very low salt index and a neutral pH. The nutrients in it are fully available, but they are gradually released for plant uptake. We call it prolonged availability. That means that if you put the fertilizer in the soil, it won't dissolve instantaneously and then can be lost, but it will be dissolved gradually during a period of time. And this is very good for the environment because there is less risk of leaching of the nutrient. It has residual nutrients for the next crop. And also the polysulphate, because it's a natural mineral, is approved for use in organic agriculture. It has the organic certificate OMRI from the USA and Canada, also in the European Union and Brazil, Israel, and many other countries. And it has a low carbon footprint. This mineral was known many years ago. The first experiment done was reported from the USA, from Texas, in 1932. They received some samples on the polyhalite and they checked it against the sulfate of potash. And you can see here that the polyhalite performed as good as the sulfate of potash, and they arrived to the conclusion that the polyhalite can be used as a fertilizer. The first samples were many, many years after that, in the late 90s. It was started to mine in the UK, in the same mine I showed you before. And we have done some trials then to see if the polyhalite or polysulphate can be used as a fertilizer. We compared with the equivalent standard, which is a mixture of potassium sulfate, magnesium sulfate, calcium sulfate. And we saw here, like you see in the graph, that the potassium, magnesium, and sulfur was taken up even better than the equivalent, and the yield was as good as the equivalent. So again, we arrived to the conclusion that it's a good fertilizer. And we also tested again the MOP for potassium at different doses, and you can see that the uptake from polysulfate of potassium was better than the MOP, that the potassium chloride alone. And that the higher the rate of polysulfate, the higher the potassium uptake by ryegrass. So these and many other trials show us that the polysulfate is a good source of nutrients and can be used as fertilizer. Another trial that we did is to show this gradual release or the prolonged release of nutrients from the polysulfate. We did in the University of Nottingham soil column trial, which collected the leachate and see the release of the sulfur as compared to ammonium sulfate, sulfate of potash, and glyceride, which is magnesium sulfate. And we see here that the release of the ammonium sulfate is very quick. The sulfate of potash and glyceride are after that, but the prolonged release is only by the polysulfate. And we can see that the release of sulfate is for 50 days. And this release, because it's during the growth of the plant, it matches better the uptake of the sulfur by the plant. And it is not lost in by leaching with the rains, like the ammonium sulfate, that it dissolves immediately because of the prolonged availability. The same we can see for the potassium as compared with the potassium chloride and potassium sulfate, that they release the potassium very quickly, but you can see here again the prolonged availability of the polysulfate. Regarding trials with fruits, we have a lot of trials around the world, experiments with universities, with institutes, with different crops, in different countries. Some of them are for fruit crops. Here we can see some glimpses in China for cherries. We can see the cracks without polysulfate that you cannot see when polysulfate is applied. For Malaysia, in pineapple, you can see the longer shelf life with the polysulfate application. Again, Malaysia, for watermelon, you can see the better vegetative growth of the plant that is covering all the soil where polysulfate was applied. In China, for grapes, you can see that the grapes are bigger and are more fruits than without. I will present in detail a trial done in China province, in Henan province, with the Henan Agricultural University. The objective here was to compare three treatments. One is the farmers' fertilizer practice, which they applied NPK in a very high dose with organic fertilizer. The soil test and formula fertilization, which they adapt the formulation according to the soil test levels. And you can see here that they lower the amount of NPK. And the third treatment is the same with polyhalite, that you can see that we add additional potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. This was tested for 3 ages of trees, 10, 15, and 20 years old trees, grown on calcareous soils with 3 replicates per treatment. Here you can see the results on the fruit weight, on the fruit number, and the yield, and you can see that the polysulfate increased the fruit weight, the fruit number, and the yield, and the increase was higher when the tree is younger. But at all ages, you can see a very good response on the polysulfate as compared to the farmer's practice, and also to compare to the soil test fertilizer formula. Here you can see the effect of the treatment on the quality of the fruits. And you can see here that the polysulfate increased the diameter of the fruits, the sugar content, decreased the acidity, which is not wanted, of course. And here you can see that the polyhalite, polysulfate in the photos, the fruits are bigger and with better color. And we calculated also the profitability for the farmers. And you can see here that why with the polyhalite, the cost of the fertilizer is higher. But because of the higher yield, the revenue and the net income is much higher. And you can see that it is higher for all the 3 ages of the trees. And this is a very, very good increase in the net income. So the conclusions for this trial is that compared with the fertilizer practice, the polysulphate increased the fruit yield for all 3 ages, increased the number of fruits per tree, the fruit weight, and the fruit size. It also increased the quality of the fruit, the sugar content, the sugar acid ratio, the vitamin C content, and decreased the acidity of the fruits. And the net income of the farmer is increased with the polysulphate application, very, very high for younger trees, and it decreases with age, but still a 47% increase for 20 years old trees is very good. We have more trials with polysulphate, which I will present only the highlights. In China, for pomelo, we see that the polysulphate increased the fruit yield and the quality parameters, that is fruit size and flesh weight. For Malaysia, in pineapple, the polysulphate increased by 11% the yield of grade A fruits. And also the plants with polysulphate had less symptoms of potassium deficiency, bigger leaves, bigger fruit size, stronger plants, and the higher Brix level and better shelf life. For kiwi in China, we see that the treatment of polysulphate and megapoly, which is polysulphate granulated with sulphate of potash, it has the best yield, 3 times more than the control. For Colombia, in strawberries, we see yield increases of 95% with polysulphate fertilizer, along with a better fruit setting, appearance, and shelf life. In banana in Brazil, we see that the polysulphate increased the vigor of bunches and slightly increased the diameter of stems and increased the crop productivity. In this trial, they used a mixture of polysulphate blends and the MOP, potassium chloride. In Malaysia, for durian, also the fruit weight was increased with polysulphate by almost 28%. And also they have a firmer pulp. They have higher fat content, lower carbohydrate content as compared to the control. And this wanted onion sulfur odor, the strong smell of the durian, was increased with polysulphate application because this increased the volatile sulfur compounds. So my take-home messages for this lecture is that the polysulphate has proven to give excellent results for fruits. On farm, it is recommended 400 kilograms per hectare of polysulphate as a dose for fruit crops. It can be applied directly straight into the seedbed before planting or with fertilizer blends. It is compatible with any fertilizer at planting. For trees and plantation, perennial crops can be applied at the base of the tree before the next flash of growth. And in general, we saw that experimental results show that the polysulphate effectively provides the 4 nutrients, sulfur, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. These nutrients are essential to crop growth and health, thus proving that balanced fertilization is the key to quality, sustainable fruit farming around the world. Thank you very much.